How is it that we find ourselves surrounded by such complexity, such elegance?
The genes of you and me, the genes of you and me, we're all made of DNA. We're all made of the same chemical DNA. We're all made of DNA.
Hi, you're watching DNA Today, a multi-award-winning genetics podcast where we explore everything to do with genetics, from CRISPR to rare diseases to new research. We have won the Science and Medicine Podcast Award for many years now. We have hundreds of episodes, and we really hope you enjoy these conversations where we dive into so many genetic concepts. I'm Kira Deneen, a certified genetic counselor and your host. In this episode, we're learning about a rare genetic disorder called Smith-Magenis Syndrome. I'm joined by Scotti Taylor, who's going to teach us about the condition and also share about her oldest daughter, Drew, who was diagnosed with the condition not that long ago. So something that's still very fresh in terms of what your family's been processing. So Scotti, thank you so much for coming on. And, you know, we were talking a little bit before we hit the record button, and you're just such an open person. So I think a lot of people are going to learn a lot just about your family's journey and Drew specifically.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to share this information, share our journey. I think if I can help one person like the person that reached out to me and helped me, that's my goal. So thanks for having me.
Yes. And we're going to get into how that happened in terms of having that potential diagnosis and where that went. But before we do that, I would love to just learn a little bit more about your daughter, Drew. What is she like? What makes her smile?
So Drew is 22. She has so many strengths and so many weaknesses, extreme strengths and extreme weaknesses, I would say. She's so funny. She's bitingly funny. She has a humor like she thinks so differently, and it opens so many people's world that get to know her because she is super intelligent and she's incredibly witty. She has an incredible long-term memory. She can remember if you gave her a present on her second birthday, she can remember what you gave her and she will never let you forget it. She will thank you every time she sees you. It is like it's incredible. When she's happy, she's so happy, and the way that she views the world and the way that she just talks to everybody that passes by and just always has a smile on her face. She's incredible. And in the same respect, we experience so many behavioral challenges on the flip side, that before her diagnosis of Smith-Magenis, I used to describe it to people when they kind of ask about Drew. I would describe it as, I would say she presents as autistic, but she's way more social than an autistic typical,
like presentation of autism that we think about, a stereotypical, right?
She's never met a stranger. In fact, she has no stranger danger, which is one of the things that we, consistently try to work on. But she has these tantrums that can be so violent and so scary. I describe that part of it as it's like she has very, very severe Tourette's. She goes into these episodes. When they do happen, I can almost see something change in her pupils, even though, she's been tested up, down, everywhere for seizures. There's no seizure detected. And she kind of goes into a space that it can be very scary for people who don't know her and that are not around a lot, especially young children. As Drew has aged, those spurts of behaviors, the time frame has diminished. Now they're not as long. They used to last all day when she was young. Now she's learned so much and she's so much more intelligent and aware that even though she has them, she can pull herself out of them very quickly. Not very quickly. It depends on the day, but sometimes very quickly. When it happens, and she comes out of it, she's always remorseful. She's always just, has no control over it. There's
Right. It kind
no
of just
control.
takes over
It
in
takes
terms of
over.
she's in that mode almost.
Yes, and what that looks like is severe hitting herself in the head, dropping to the floor, throwing things, screaming, slamming doors, anything. It's just it's you know a very severe tantrum, almost like what a 2-year-old would have, I would say, but even maybe a little more severe because of the intense hitting of herself in the own head, self-injurious behaviors, which a lot of autistic children do have. She is probably the biggest thing is her physical outbursts are usually directed towards me, sometimes her father, very rarely her 3 siblings. When they were younger, when they were younger and Drew was realizing that they were, because she's the oldest,
Right. She's the oldest of 4,
the
you're
oldest
saying.
of 4, as she was realizing, as they were developing faster than her and above her, and she started to kind of understand the differences that she had, I believe it was very difficult for her to express her emotions, obviously. So there was a period of time there where she did direct some of it at them, pulling my daughter's hair, it only lasted a couple years there, and that she kind of stopped doing that. But it is very much, I would describe that part of it as like an Alzheimer's patient, to where they a lot of times you'll hear that's when it's directed at the primary caregiver, because they want to be so independent. And that's the thing with Drew. She wants to be so independent. She believes that she does not have any
like limitations?
Any limitations,
okay,
I would say. So but on the flip side of that, she can't be safe often. She tends to not even check before she walks across the street still. So with me, as my job as the primary caregiver and the primary director and the primary everything, all the keys hold in my hands, it becomes a very physical situation with me very often. So,
and is there certain things that you've found trigger these episodes, or does it seem to be very random?
It is not random, but it is unavoidable, because it is the word no. We can't do that. It is like no. It is. It can be very from anything to, you won't buy me my favorite crayons that I want, or she realizes that that she's done something that she wasn't supposed to have, like rent some movies on the TV. Basically, it's just when she was younger, she was diagnosed there as oppositional defiant, and that is a very common thing that these parents will hear first. Often misdiagnosed as autism. Often there's always an oppositional defiance, because it is an extreme reaction to any sort of authority, resistance to changes in routine, unavoidable changes in routine. She also has a short attention span, which can contribute. I should add that one of the main contributors is the fact that an SMS individual, their sleep-wake cycle is completely reversed. So they don't process melatonin correctly. So oftentimes they're up all night, excessive sleepiness during the day, which that is always added to Drew's issues behaviorally. If she's tired, she doesn't want to get up and, go to school. And it's that.
And how has that affected you, Scotti, in terms of being, you mentioned you have a partner.
Yes.
But you're more of what you've described as the primary caregiver to Drew. Yeah. I mean, I've heard from other parents of kids with disorders that sleep disturbance is part of their symptoms, of just how hard that is on parents and caregivers, because you're someone that probably before, having Drew in your life would just go to bed, sleep hopefully 8-9 hours maybe, and then, continue on your day.
Well, and also the fact that she's the oldest, and I was pregnant and having babies for very long in there too. But
Yes.
to call her pediatrician bawling, saying this something is not right. She does not sleep. And she would tell me, just give her Benadryl.
Right.
And, you just can't.
And that's a little invalidating because they're like, no, it's something
Yeah,
else. It's
I
something,
knew.
it's something deeper than that.
And then as I started having other kids,
You're like, wait a minute, this is so different developmentally
right.
compared to what Drew was having in terms of certain milestones, it sounds like.
Yeah.
And you're going to have like the sleep regression at some point. It's like, baby slept through the night. Oh, they didn't. But it eventually gets to a point where they should be sleeping through the night.
Yes. And I won't deny that there were a lot of years there that I was probably close to losing my mind if I didn't lose my mind. It was very difficult. Around 4, she started, that's when the tantrum started, and she would scream all day long, all day. And it was, it's all a blur now, but as she became older and we were medicating her, I think we started at 7 to medicate her, for her, her behavioral issues. We started with ADHD medications are usually always the first line, which sent her into overdrive. It was, and then we started down all the SSRIs, and then we did all the, I will say that when she was about 9, we tried Lamictal, which is a medication for usually bipolar. It's a mood stabilizer.
Right. I knew it sounded familiar. Yeah.
Right. At that point in time, that worked like it was night and day.
Wow.
Now, that lasted for about 2 years. And my assumption is that probably hormones started kicking in. And
sure, puberty is starting.
Yeah. And that was it. And we've never found a medication since then. So, back to the sleep. As we started medicating her, her sleep patterns were not perfect, but she's always woken up at like 4:30 a.m. It doesn't matter if she goes to bed at 7. It doesn't matter if she goes to bed at midnight. It's 4 a.m. on the dot, even with medication. So for the last many years, her bedtime is always 9:30. She goes to bed very easily because of her medication.
Sure.
But she is up at 4:30. We now, she has an alarm clock. She knows she doesn't come out until 6 a.m. She can stay in there. She has her kitty in there, and she just chills out until, but when she was little, of course, that wasn't the case. So there were a lot of 4:30 mornings that I just it was hard.
Goodness. Yeah. And especially like you were saying, like while you were pregnant, I'm a prenatal genetic counselor. So I'm always talking with pregnant people and just them saying, oh, the sleeping is just so hard. So, and then you have like, what if you finally got to sleep and now you're like, well, Drew is awake. I've got to now be up and making sure that, she's okay and just kind of overseeing whatever she's getting up to.
Yeah.
I did want to kind of talk about the diagnostic odyssey a little bit in terms of, you were in one of these online communities for, I think it was called Special Needs Moms, or just, for moms of kids with special needs.
So let's start there by saying I had Drew at 26 weeks. And she
really 26 weeks of pregnancy you delivered.
So
wow, that's very early.
It's very early. She weighed 112. She was in the hospital for 5 months. There were all kinds of surgeries, everything. Premature birth is very common for SMS. However, we for Drew's entire life, we attributed her issues to being premature. And I believe
26 weeks. It's like, that a lot of babies, unfortunately, for people that aren't familiar with gestational weeks, a lot of babies that are born at 26 weeks, unfortunately, may not make it and may not thrive.
And significant developmental delay. And Drew her facial features now, she looked very, she did have a preemie look to her, but she did look very non-presenting. There were none of the very physical characteristics that if you look at her now, you could see that when she was little. So all of Drew's issues that came up, even all the physical issues that are usually attributed to SMS, everything was always attributed to prematurity. So, and I will say this, that when you have a premature child, of course, it wasn't my fault. It wasn't anybody's fault. It happened. Nobody could ever tell me why. I didn't know why, but still, there is a part of a mother that is always like, what did I do? Right? I was in Hawaii 2 weeks before. Did I jump off that rock? You know, that's always there, right? So the amount of, when I received her diagnosis, the amount of release that a diagnosis does for a person and a family is immeasurable. It's just my cat speaking.
Little feature there.
Yeah.
But for those watching the video, I mean, I've heard that from so many parents of having a diagnosis that
It
also is shown to be random. It just happened. There was nothing that you could have done differently to prevent or anything. And it's natural, I feel like, to have those thoughts of, well, what if I did this different? Mm-hmm. Did that lead to the premature birth?
Right.
That, yeah, to have that kind of, as you said, that
and
release
then to
of like, it was random.
It was random and not even carried. It's de novo, which was not been carried in either of our families.
Right.
Which is, life-changing, completely life-changing. Yeah. So, and I'm about to turn 50. So the amount of life-changing that I've had in the last couple of years
is
immense. But,
and it goes back to that fellow parent that I think you had posted a picture of Drew or something.
Talk about
right?
That. So I'm a member of all these, special needs Facebook groups. We always are posting things. It has been a source of comfort, strength, everything. There's a yearly thing called Night to Shine. Have you heard of that?
I have not. Tell me about it.
Okay. Tim Tebow Foundation puts it on. It's a prom for people with disabilities. It's an international event. It's always one night on the year. It's all over the world. You can elect to, if our church puts it on, they're
like a part of the network almost.
Part of the network. They're sponsored. You can reach out if you have a organization. It doesn't have to be a church. It can be anyone. Her school has one, but she likes to go to the one that she goes to. It is an amazing event. I mean, if you look them up, Night to Shine. Could be on Tim Tebow Foundation, but I think there's a whole separate like Instagram and everything for Night to Shine.
We'll put it in the show notes for everybody. Yep.
For sure. It is so heartwarming. Anyway, we all post our videos of that. I posted Drew's a couple days later. This was a couple years ago. A couple days later, I got a message from a mom who was across the country and basically said, "Hey, I don't want to offend you, but I think you might want to look into this. My son has this rare genetic disorder, Smith-Magenis Syndrome, and your daughter, reminds me a lot of him." And I had never heard of it. And I was like, thank you. Of course. I couldn't offend me at all. So the minute I looked into it, I started crying. I knew with 100% of my being, every amount of my being, that it was Drew. It was like, everything that I thought that I was crazy for was listed in front of me. And I knew without a doubt. So from there, the story gets much better. I immediately called a girlfriend of mine who's older than me. She's been a mentor to me. She has a medically fragile child, a medically fragile grandchild. I called her and I said, "You are not going to believe this. this woman reached out to me, and I said, I know this is true with all of my being. And she said, I got to pull over. And she said, Scotti, don't you remember me telling you about my cousin that has the daughter that, had shown some aggression when she was younger? And she said, Sonia has Smith-Magenis Syndrome.
And this is a rare condition, people.
Rare.
Not many people have this. So to be connecting with two people.
Yeah. And then she said, my cousin, Gail, is the woman who runs, oh my gosh. She runs the Smith-Magenis Clinic in San Diego, one of the only ones in the country.
And you were already living there. Is that right?
Yeah. At Rady Children's, the hospital that Drew stayed at for 5 months.
We've talked about Rady Children's a lot on this show. They're wonderful.
I mean, can you believe that?
Wow.
Gail, who is the doctor that runs the clinic, called me that night and said, okay, well, these are the steps that you need to take. We're going to get you into the next clinic, which happened to be coming up because she runs it a couple times a year. Saw her. I think now, when I've talked to her since then, I think that she believed that we weren't going to get a positive result.
Really?
I think so. She did mention that a couple times, but we started the process. We did the whole I should say also, Drew had testing when she was 8. She only had the oligo array that picked up, I told you that, she picked up the common deletions, but not mutations. And
so it missed her specific genetic cause of Smith-Magenis because it's not the typical way that people usually have a genetic cause of Smith-Magenis. So it was missed.
It was missed because we were not followed. We should have gone back at a later time and had a more extensive test. She had the whole exome test.
Right.
Which
when she was around 2021, she had that.
Yeah.
20.
And
yep.
That is an extremely expensive test.
Very much so.
Very difficult for insurance to approve it. So it took about a year to go through the process of insurance. We had to go to genetic counseling, do all that thing. And on a Friday afternoon, I got a call from Gail, and she had a smile on her face, and I just dropped to my knees and I just cried, because I went from thinking that I was the only mom in the entire world that dealt with this to having not just a community, but a foundation that supports a research consortium, a doctor that is still alive.
Dr. Smith,
yes,
which is
Dr.
what the condition's
Smith,
named after him.
Her, yes, a woman.
Her, sorry, thank you.
The one who started to see in her clinic the patterns of the Smith-Magenis clients. And so it's just been unreal.
Wow.
So, and now that I know her, and now that I know about now that I know about her diagnosis and know Smith-Magenis, I can also look at a child and say, that child, I think, needs genetic testing, because I see some characteristics that are out of the ordinary, that may present as autistic. They've probably gotten an autism diagnosis. But there are some facial features that, as they develop and get older, develop, that now Drew looks very similar to we've met in Southern California where we live. There's currently about 12 diagnosed SMS individuals. We've met them. We've had a picnic.
Wow.
Our siblings have met. My children have met siblings just like them who get it, who understand how difficult it can be, and understand the chaos of life that we've lived. So our whole family is it's just been such a blessing. And all I can think was, what if that lady hadn't reached out to me?
You still maybe wouldn't have a diagnosis
I
for
wouldn't.
Drew.
And I will tell you, I had given up. I had taken Drew to Kennedy Krieger. She was in the autism program there. I had beat my head against the wall for 20 years, and I had given up. I was at the point, I was reserved to, there's nothing that can help us.
Right. It's just, this is just managing the day to day of what comes up for Drew.
It is.
And saying, okay, this is where we're at.
Right. But it is largely still that, right? Nothing's changed dramatically since her diagnosis, except that I now have a community to say, okay, this medication isn't working for us. What did you guys go to next? And there's all these fine tuning. Extreme constipation is a hallmark of SMS. What's working for you guys? This is working great.
That is so important, just to have that community to talk with and be able to bounce ideas off of each other. And, when I went to the clinic, like, we're doing this, and being aware of like potential clinical trials in the future. And there's just so much that goes with that. When you met these other families and individuals that have Smith-Magenis syndrome, what were some of the similarities that you're like, oh my gosh, same thing with Drew? Okay. Because it seems like from you sharing of, to kind of recap a little bit, we've talked about some behavioral troubles that she's had, the sleep disturbances, some more maybe subtle facial features. And from my research and just kind of being aware of the condition, that's kind of the level in terms of me just more being aware. I wouldn't know the condition, but seems to be also the self-harm of like, all of these things seem to be common for people that have Smith-Magenis, but also some of those things that you mentioned at the very top of the show of having a really good memory, having a really good sense of humor. Right. I saw that written in terms of being described for people that have this. So it seems like
it is common.
In some ways she has like a classic presentation.
Classic presentation. However, we should talk about this. This is very important. Smith-Magenis is the deletion or mutation of the RAI1 gene on the 17th chromosome.
Yes.
Only about 10% of those individuals have the mutation and not the deletion. Drew has the mutation, so she's one of an even smaller population.
Right.
This population, her population, is very different. Not very, but presents in ways that are very meaningful to diagnoses than the patients with the deletion. For example, Drew has a much bigger bag of tricks. The mutation individuals are usually very, very much more intelligent, very much more cunning. Their behavior is also much more negative because along with that intelligence comes with that drive to be independent, comes with that, I don't want to be told no.
Right. The awareness, because their intellectual ability is higher. So that kind of correlates.
Right. She does, they do usually, they have obesity as an issue, which it is for Drew. We've always dealt with that. I believe that the deletion individuals, from what I've heard, and I could be getting this wrong also because I'm so new to this. I believe that their behavior problems are usually not as significant.
Okay.
They are also present totally different. They're very high. They're skinny all the way. They're thin to where you would think that they were. A lot of patients on ADHD medications have, that it does affect their diet. And I mean, you can look at it as a child that They just present differently. That's
Sure. That you've just noticed these differences. It'd be interesting, like, I'll have to do a little research to see if there's other like research that has established that and kind of like put that out into, you know, the clinical research
yes, I
world.
believe there is. I would say
Oh, interesting.
yes.
All right, I'll do a little research, people. I'll throw
Do.
some things in the show notes there. But as we kind of wrap up, I obviously it's so important to raise awareness for Smith-Magenis and so many types of rare diseases. We've covered so many on the show. For you, why is it important?
I can't stress enough the importance of knowing that all of these things that I stayed up so many late nights researching, that no one could ever tell me why all these things were happening, to finally get an answer and have even a pamphlet in my hand that says behavior strategies for Smith-Magenis patients that I can then hand to my parents or to her day program staff. There are so many small idiosyncrasies that the fact that there's a population with this, it's going to help so many people in the long run. It's going to help these people be understood better, which is they're going to have a better place in the community. They're going to be able to be taken care of into adulthood better. The more we get the word out, even the more genetic testing that can be readily available for families who may be experiencing these issues. It's important stuff. And for me, I think that I probably would be nowhere in the mental healthy state that I am now if I were to have continued down this path feeling so alone.
Sure. That is understandable, and just having that diagnosis gives you so much support and direction in that sense. And it comes back to, because you had access to genetic testing to allow for that diagnosis to happen. And so for more people to be able to have access, and also that also begins with the awareness to be able to seek genetic testing, and then is that accessible to them? So I think that's something that, you know, we really wanted to stress during the interview, and just that, you know, is a takeaway for listeners.
Yes. Is that accessible? And also to understand that more extensive, even if you get even if something is not found, that you still follow up, that you continue to press, that you advocate for yourself and your individual, that more comprehensive tests should be taken.
Yeah, I agree. As a genetic healthcare provider that orders genetic testing, yes, you said it beautifully. I think that's just really important. And thank you again so much, Scotti, for just sharing about Drew and your family. We have listeners that are, you know, a lot of genetic counseling students or doctors that are in med school, of just being able to not just read about Smith-Magenis in a textbook and be like, all right, let me memorize these symptoms. And okay, it's on chromosome 17, talk about the RAI1 gene, all that, but to hear it from, let me learn about Drew and what she experiences, and have that be their avenue of learning about Smith-Magenis is just so helpful. And to have a story and a person to serve as an example is just so helpful, let alone, you know, the other parents, caregivers listening that, you know, either their child, maybe they searched this on Google and it came up because they just got a Smith-Magenis diagnosis, or for other parents, caregivers that have a child that they're still on that diagnostic odyssey and just resonate with a lot of different symptoms and, you know, challenges that you guys have had. So
I would
thank
like
you for being open.
I would like to add that there is PRISMS is the research foundation. It runs a annual conference where all the current research is being presented. There is an educator and researcher rate. I haven't been. I'm going this year. It's supposed to be fascinating. So yeah, that's a cool thing too. So
Yes, we'll throw that in the show notes as well. So a lot of resources for you guys in this episode. But thank you again, Scotti.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching DNA Today. To access all of our episodes, head over to dnatoday.com. We also have a lot of bonus content on there that you can enjoy. If you have any questions, comments, suggestions, guest pitches, you name it, send them in to info@dnatoday.com. We'd also really appreciate if you could take a moment to rate and review the podcast on Apple, Spotify, wherever you listen to the show. It really helps more nerds like yourself find the show. Also, if you like giveaways and other ways to connect with us, I recommend following us on social. We're at DNA Today Podcast. We also have a Patreon if you want to be the most level involved in the show. That's also at DNA Today Podcast. Thank you so much for listening and watching. Join us next time to learn and discover new advances in the world of genetics.
We're all made of DNA. We're all made of the same chemical DNA. We're all made